The air smelled like scorched polymers and melted dreams. Cal Ravik knelt beside. The body boots crunching on broken glass and charred gravel trying not to gag on. The chemical haze drifting through the battlefield, the sky above, was a sickly bruise of orange and violet lit by the smoldering wreckage of an orbital dropship that hadn't quite nailed the landing part of its journey around him. What remained of Bravo Unit's forward post looked more like a junkyard's nightmare than anything resembling military order. Still, compared to last week's firefight in the sulfur pits of Rex 9, this counted as scenic. The body wasn't wearing Earth Gov colors, that much was immediately clear. No insignia, no rank stripes, no regulation blood type patch on the shoulder, just that strange armor, organic, iridescent, like the carapace of some massive insect had been boiled down into elegant curved plates. Her limbs were long, too long, and her ears, they weren't exactly elf-like, but they weren't not elf-like either. Long, elegant, and rigged with faint glowing lines that pulsed even now, as if her nervous system hadn't gotten the memo that she was out cold. Cal reached down and hovered his fingers just above her neck. No obvious wounds, no burns. Breathing shallow heartbeat, well, assuming she had one, it wasn't in any of the usual places. She's either dead, he muttered, or in one hell of a power nap. His earpiece crackled. Ravik report, still alive, mostly found something weird. Like enemy ordnance, or weird like last time when you claimed a barrel of lubricant was an emergency escape pod. Hey, that barrel saved lives. Maris, you got stuck inside it for 4 hours. Cal sighed and muted the channel. He turned his attention back to the alien woman. At least she looked like a woman, maybe a very convincingly humanoid toaster. He'd seen Stranger last year, a team on Percy. Theta had accidentally declared war on a sentient algae that spoke only in light pulses and bass vibrations. He still had tinnitus from the diplomatic dance party. Okay, sleeping beauty, he said quietly, brushing a loose strand of her silver-black hair away from her face. Time to see if you've got a pulse or a vendetta. He gently touched her shoulder. Nothing, so he leaned closer, almost whispering, I'm Cal. Her eyes snapped open, golden bright as twin suns, pupils like slivers of dark metal. Then she moved impossibly fast. One moment she was down, the next she was on her feet, knees bent, one hand slicing through the air toward his throat. Cal yelped and fell backward, boots flailing. She stopped a hair's breadth from his neck, fingers outstretched, trembling slightly. Cal, she breathed, not a question, a statement. Then just as suddenly she collapsed again. Like a puppet whose strings had been cut, Cal lay sprawled in the dust and blinking up at the ruined sky. Well, that was dramatic. Back at the outpost, a term Cal used generously to describe the hollowed-out wreck of a cargo hauler filled with jury-rigged generators and bad decisions, he dragged her inside with all the grace of a man hauling furniture he didn't know how to assemble. He laid her on a cot, dimmed the lights, and stood back, arms folded, waiting for something, anything to make sense. Maybe she's a psychic assassin, he mused aloud, or maybe I'm allergic to women with ears longer than my career. From the corner, Misha buzzed in low-power mode. The support drone's voice, somehow always disapproving, drifted through the static. Your heart rate spiked. Should I initiate cardiovascular calibration? Number maybe, I don't know. She said my name. You say your name all the time. She said it like it meant something. Well, statistically speaking, it does mean something, just not necessarily to her. Cal threw a blanket over the alien woman and paced the room, glancing every so often at the faint glow pulsing along her ears. They looked delicate, beautiful in a vaguely terrifying way. 4 hours later, she sat up, no grogginess, no blink yawn. She just opened her eyes, sat up, and stared at him. You are the vessel, she said. Cal blinked. I mean, I have a digestive system, if that's what your name. It is encoded in what exactly? Space mayonnaise. She frowned, as though trying to decide whether to vaporize him or explain. Your bloodline carries the key of binding my body, recognizes the signal. Cal ran a hand through his dusty hair. Okay, let's rewind. Who are you? How do you know my name? And are you going to stab me? She tilted her head. I am Yara of the Alluri. I have died 6 times. Cal blinked. Well, he said not to brag, but I've only died once, and that was during a VR simulation, I think, still disputed by the techs. You carry the signal that wakes me. I'm starting to think I need a new deodorant. She stood slowly brushing her hands down the sides of her armor. There is much to explain. And not enough time while I'm off duty, and only mildly concussed, so hit me. She looked him over with eyes that seemed to glow from the inside out. Our people made a pact long ago, yours and mine a promise. Buried in genetics and code, you were never meant to be a soldier, you were bred to be a cipher. Cal stared at her. I was bred to eat freeze-dried noodles and get yelled at by superiors. You are the heir to a forgotten key, a living password. He sat down hard. Okay, he said, rubbing his temples. You're saying I'm what, some kind of cosmic USB drive more or less? Do I at least get a cool upgrade? Laser eyes, universal translator, better knee joints, iller paused. You may have dreams. Cal narrowed his eyes. That's ominous. They will not be pleasant of course not. There was a long pause, then quietly she said, thank you for saying your name. Cal looked at her. That's the least weird thing I've done all week. Another pause, then she smiled just a little. I like your sarcasm. Well, good, Cal said, because it's the only thing keeping me from screaming right now. She nodded solemnly. Then keep talking. It might be the only thing that saves us. They didn't let her out of the medical bay for 2 days, not because she was a threat, although Cal had left several strategically placed chairs in a broom handle near the doorway just in case she decided to karate chop anyone again, but because Misha insisted on running 48 hours of neurobiological analysis, that translated roughly to sitting nearby and pretending to scan her, while humming passive-aggressively. Alara didn't seem to mind. She spent most of her time seated on the edge of the cot, eyes closed, legs crossed, looking like a monk who just discovered air conditioning. Every now and then she'd say something cryptic like, the drift is shifting, or the dust remembers more than we do, and Cal would nod sagely and write it down in a notebook labeled possible alien poetry or just weird phrases. On the third day, she opened her eyes mid-meditation and said, we need to go. Cal, who had just successfully balanced 3 ration bars on Misha's antenna, blinked. We do. The signal is moving south by 9 degrees planetary rotation. There's something calling to you. Cal pointed at himself with mock confusion. To me, not to you. I follow it through you. You are the cipher. I've also been called a disaster, a problem, and once a sentient space potato by a girl on Sean's station. Iller rose to her feet. We'll need transportation and weapons, and one of your loud companions. Ah yes, the sacred trinity. The loud companion in question was Jish Torvak, engineer, demolitions expert, and self-declared mechanical prophet of broken things. Jish was half human, half something that once wrestled gravity into submission, and entirely incapable of whispering. He'd replaced one of his lungs with a coolant filter, which made him sound like a blender with attitude. You want to go where? Jish bellowed as Cal and Alara stood before him in the half-lit storage bay through a war zone in a half-track crawler held together by glue spite and my left kidney. Cal shrugged. She says I'm a living password. I say you're an idiot. Both things can be true. Jish's eyes narrowed as he looked at Alara. And you planning to vaporize us mid-trip, or are you done with your ninja routine? Iara inclined her head. I do not vaporize those who smell of battery acid and existential doubt. Jish stared for a moment, then barked a laugh. All right. Space elf, you can ride shotgun. The crawler, affectionately named the flatulent wombat, had survived 5 deployments, 2 crash landings, and an unfortunate incident involving a sentient fungus it wheezed to life as Jish punched in coordinates. Cal sat behind the wheel, mostly because he was the only one who could fit without recalibrating the seat, and partly because everyone else refused after what happened during the last ice slick incident. The journey began with much rattling, clanking, and a particularly ominous grinding sound that Jish insisted was just the soul of the machine stretching its legs as they bounced across the fractured terrain. Cal glanced at Yara through the rearview mirror. She sat still, eyes on the horizon, as if she could see something none of them could. So Cal said casually, you're part of a mysterious ancient race brought back to life by the sound of my name, and we're now hurtling toward an undefined source of galactic mystery. This about the average Tuesday for you. She didn't look away. In my last life, I was a language architect. I designed Lex to encode planetary defense protocols. Before that, I was a starfaring diplomat, and once a child who spoke to the oceans. Cal blinked. And I once ate 15 credits worth of vending machine squid rings on a dare. I imagine your stomach has known Suffering, oh, it still sends me hate. Male Jish let out a snort from the engine compartment. If the fate of the galaxy rests on Cal's gastrointestinal trauma. We're all doomed. They camped that night beneath the broken ribs of an old supply bridge, the steel beams reaching toward the stars like fingers trying to remember what it felt like to touch Ara, remained quiet, occasionally drawing strange symbols in the dust with a metal rod. Jish tried roasting something vaguely edible over a heat vent, and called it stew. Cal just lay back and stared up at the stars, pretending none of this was starting to feel like fate creeping up behind him with a bucket of cold water. Why me? He asked the sky. Why not someone with better genes, or at least someone who doesn't snore? You were chosen. Alara said suddenly beside him. Not by committee or intention, by probability, by chaos theory. Softest whisper. That's the most poetic way I've ever heard someone say. Random dice roll. You simplify what you don't understand. I complicate what I do. It's part of the charm. She looked at him, and for a moment there was something in her expression. Something heavy with memory. The last time I was awakened, the cipher was a child barely walking. He died before he could speak his name. Cal's grin faltered. And how old was he supposed to be? 27, like you. The wind stirred around them, making the steel bones of the bridge above groan like some ancient beast turning in its sleep. I didn't ask for this. Cal muttered. No one ever does, she said, but the drift doesn't care about asking. It cares about continuation. He frowned. You keep saying drift. What is that? Some alien god, a giant mystical laundry cycle? It is a protocol, a layer beneath the visible universe, patterns and entropy. When a civilization reaches certain thresholds, technological, cognitive, destructive, the drift activates observers like you. I was made to be one, and yet I failed. Well, Cal said, stretching his arms behind his head, you haven't met me until now. Iara looked amused. Is that supposed to give me hope? It's supposed to give you perspective. I'm not sure if you're brave or foolish. I contained multitudes that night while the others slept. Cal dreamed of lights that hummed his name in languages he couldn't understand. In the darkness behind his eyes, galaxies bloomed and folded, and somewhere impossibly far away, something heard him and smiled. They drove into the fog sometime after dawn, if such a thing could be tracked on a planet where the sun rose from 3 different directions, and argued with itself about which one counted. The crawler coughed smoke, with every bounce lurching like an overstuffed mule with a caffeine addiction, while Jish muttered prayers in binary under his breath and threatened to dismantle the cooling system with a spoon. Alara, as usual, said nothing. She simply watched the swirling mist ahead, occasionally tapping patterns on the window with her fingers. 4 quick taps, pause, 2 more. Cal wasn't sure if it was some RE meditation technique or a really intense version of space Morse code, but he didn't ask. He'd learned by now that most of her answers raised more questions, like peeling an onion and finding increasingly cryptic fortune cookies. Inside, Jish finally broke the silence. I once drank coolant during a bet, he announced from the back. Please tell me you won. Cal said, I lost. Memories fuzzy after that, but I think I learned to communicate with vending machines for a bit. Did they respond? Only with passive aggression and expired snack bars. Alara looked between them, then back at the fog. You humans process danger with absurdity. It's called coping, Cal said. Our other option is screaming loudly for hours. They slowed to a crawl as the fog thickened, swallowing up the ruins ahead like a hungry glacier. The remains of a once grand outpost loomed in fragmented silhouettes. Cracked towers, shattered domes, an ancient antenna array that still blinked red every 30 seconds as if pretending it had a job. This is it, Alara murmured, stepping out as soon as the crawler shuddered to a halt. Cal followed, hand on his pulse blaster, just in case they stumbled into anything less friendly than broken buildings and existential dread. The air was thick with static charge and the ground buzzed beneath their boots like the planet was trying to whisper secrets through their souls. They found the source of the signal in what used to be a library or a data nexus, or maybe an extremely optimistic coffee shop, if the half-melted sign with an abstract cup icon was anything to go by. At the center of the wreckage stood a column, sleek and obsidian, humming softly, not attached to anything, not buried in the ground, just there, upright, untouched by decay. Cal stepped forward. Well, this doesn't scream trap at all. It's not a trap, said Reaching toward it, it's an interface with what the last time I interfaced. With ancient alien tech, I blacked out and woke up fluent in 3 extinct dialects and extremely allergic to kale. Then you're ready. Before he could protest, she took his hand and placed it on the column's surface. It was warm. Buzzing, it felt like holding a thought in physical form. Suddenly, the world around him cracked like glass. He wasn't in the ruins anymore. He stood in a vast star-filled expanse, endless constellations pulsing with motion. He could feel the drift, the way it curled through probability, how it selected and layered timelines like a gambler with too many cards. He was standing inside the architecture of fate itself, and it was sizing him up, a voice, not a sound, but a sensation, like a thought brushing. His spine whispered, access key recognized, initializing memory vault. Then it all snapped back. He gasped, stumbled, and fell to one knee in the dust. His heart was racing, or maybe vibrating. What the hell was that? He wheezed. A memory cascade, Ilara said. It began the moment your genetic sequence matched the core frequency of the drift's trigger point. You activated a vault. Great, so I'm a walking USB stick again. Jish poked the column. I don't like that it didn't explode. Things like this should explode. It's comforting when they explode. Cal looked at him. Remind me never to take you to a museum. The column shimmered, and a projection burst upward. A map, not just a map, but a living blueprint, constantly shifting and reconfiguring. Stars blinked into new alignments, roots twisted through void corridors, and at the center one symbol pulsed in rhythm with Cal's heartbeat. This is what it's been hiding, Alero whispered. The route to the archive, which is, she looked at him gravely, the source, the origin of the pact where the Alarian humans first forged the bond. It's the only place that can fully unlock you. Not to nitpick, Cal said, but the phrase fully unlock you makes me nervous. It should, Jish muttered. Arms crossed. Unlocked things tend to make a mess before they could argue more. The map shifted. An alert flared in crimson. An inbound signal approaching. Fast ship. Jish said, no ships. Garlic jerky. Though Cal remained unconvinced it was ever edible. They'd barely escaped the scorch fold with their skins intact, and the crawler looking like it had been chewed on by a bored god. Alara sat silent in the back, tracing lines on a data pad, symbols Cal couldn't read, but which pulsed faintly with a familiar glow. Jish was wedged under the control panel, muttering darkly, you know, it'd be nice to go a full 24 hours without violating at least 5 galactic safety codes or physics. I thought breaking physics was kind of your hobby, Cal said, kicking a smoking vent shut with his heel. Breaking physics is fun when it's voluntary, Jish snapped, not when the universe throws a tantrum and rewrites its own instruction manual. While we're inside the car, outside the desert had shifted. The scorchfold lay far behind, and now the terrain rolled with strange symmetry. Miles of violet sand and glimmering black stone shaped like scales. It had no name on any map Jish could find. Cal leaned over the console. Where exactly are we? Jish emerged with a handful of melted fuses in a defeated expression. According to my sensors, nowhere. According to the stars, we're slightly to the left of sensible. According to my stomach, Cal said, we've missed 2 meals and a nap. You didn't have to eat the emergency jerky, Jish replied. I did. It threatened me. Alara finally looked up. This region is part of the Rift Fringe, a zone left unanchored during the collapse. Time and matter here fluctuate so slightly. Haunted? Cal asked. She tilted her head. Or highly alive? Jish groaned. Of course, we're in a sentient landscape. What's next? Self-aware gravel, as if summoned. A low humming rose from beneath the crawler. The ground shifted just enough to make the crawler lurch, not enough to knock it over. Cal reached for his blaster. Jish reached for his toolkit. Alara, in contrast, simply placed her hand on the floor. It's not attacking, she said. It's responding to what? To you? Cal stared at her. Why is everything responding to me? Do I have some kind of cosmic customer service? Face the archive doesn't seek power, she replied. It seeks resonance. You're carrying a signal it remembers well, Jish said, unless that signal comes with an instruction manual. I vote we don't stick around. They steered the crawler out of the shifting terrain and toward the distant ridge line where Aura claimed another fragment of the archive might lie. A convergence node hidden beneath a collapsed observatory. According to her, the observatory once mapped the drift itself. Lines of possibility, converging realities, all woven into a stellar cartograph. Cal considered this as they rattled along the uneven path. You ever Wonder if the archive is less a thing and more a presence like we're not. Unlocking it, we're waking it up. Iller glanced at him. The archive was always partially conscious, but now it's focused on you. Great. I always wanted a fan club that could warp time and erase causality. They reached the observatory ruins at dusk, or what passed for dusk, in a place with 3 moons and no fixed sun. The structure jutted from the earth like a broken telescope. Its dome collapsed inward. The metal supports tangled like old bones. Arva led them through a fissure in the wall down into a chamber where light didn't quite behave itself. The walls were inscribed with constellations that shimmered in and out of sight. A central daze glowed as Cal approached. When he stepped onto it, the entire chamber bloomed with projected starlight. Lines of fire danced around them, patterns shifting faster than thought. Cal's body locked in place as the drift responded, wrapping him in sensation, not pain or pressure, but awareness. He could feel timelines skimming past his skin, infinite versions of himself, one who stayed a soldier, one who defected early, one who never met Alara at all. It was dizzying. I don't think I'm supposed to be seeing this much of myself, he muttered. Focus, Alara said gently. This node is a lens. It will show you the threat's origin if you align it correctly. He reached into the field and dragged a line of stars sideways. It shimmered. Another shift, a rotation, then a glimpse. Not a place, a presence, something vast and coiled in silence. Not the usurpers, but what they served. The architect, a being that sought to overwrite the drift, not for conquest, but for purity. A single dominant narrative, one story, one truth. Its will burned like a virus. Cal staggered back, gasping that thing's not just rewriting history, it's erasing possibility. It seeks to become the only author, Alara said, and you are the last contradiction. Cal looked down at his hands. I don't want to be a contradiction. I want to be mildly important. Maybe have a small statue in a town square somewhere. Statues are rarely built for the reluctant, she said. I just think if the universe hands you a sacred burden, you should at least get a manual and a coupon. The day is dim. The chamber pulsed once, then settled. They exited into a night thick with static and drifting ash. Jish met them at the crawler with his usual deadpan greeting. So did you see your past lives, or just the cosmic horror version of a family reunion? Little bit of both, Cal said. Also, I might be allergic to destiny. Well, sneeze quietly. We've got company. He pointed to the ridge where shadows moved, figures not mechanical this time, but alive, human armor painted in the style of the border regime. Friendly, Cal asked. Jish raised his blaster. Too punctual to be friendly. They approached in silence. One figure stepped forward and removed their helmet, a woman, stern, familiar. Cal's stomach dropped. Captain Vale, she smiled faintly. Hello, soldier. You've been busy. What are you doing here? You defected. You disappeared. I didn't disappear. I followed the drift, and now I need you to come with me. Jish stepped between them. He's not going anywhere. She raised a brow. Oh, you brought a tech goblin? Cute ex-tech goblin, Jish corrected. Now a full-time driver, cook, and reluctant hero. Alara moved beside Cal, her expression unreadable. She carries a shard, she said. Cal blinked. A what now? A shard of the archive, hidden, bound to her choices. Captain Vale gave a slow nod. You're not the only contradiction, Cal. You're just the loudest, and now we need to talk about your next move before the architect sends something worse. The ground trembled faintly, as if something ancient had heard its name. Cal never liked formal meetings. They reminded him too much of funerals, only with worse coffee and more starring. The camp Vale's team had set up halfway up the ridge was all sharp tents and sterile fire light, the kind that ran on quantum igniters, and had no right looking that cozy. It even smelled suspiciously like cinnamon. Jish was immediately suspicious. This is a trap, he said while chewing on something he'd liberated from the ration crates. No army food is this edible unless they're trying to distract us. Cal watched a kettle float itself over the fire, steaming politely. They're distracting me successfully. I might marry this tea. Vale hadn't changed much since the war. She still wore her hair too tight and her sentences like knives, but there was something under the surface now, less edge, more weight-like. Someone who'd seen the universe blink and now had to explain it over soup. You're not the only one the archive chose, she said as they sat around the table, which unfolded itself with a charming hum. I got my shard 2 years ago. I thought it was a malfunctioning medallion, until it started reciting my dreams in reverse order. Cal blinked. What? Is it with the archive and vague dramatic delivery? Can't it just say hi? You're chosen, here's your starter kit, and maybe a support group. The archive doesn't offer clarity, Alaro said it. Offers connection, truth beyond words, still could have tossed in a pamphlet. Jish muttered. Vale placed a small device in the center of the table. It unfolded, projecting a constellation made entirely of shifting frequencies and fractal keys. This is what we're chasing, she said. The final core of the archive buried beneath the holostep, locked behind 6 drift encoded nodes. I found 3. Alara just helped you unlock the 4th. That leaves 2, and the architect's forces are closing in on both. Cal pointed at the drifting sigils. So what happens if we reach it first? The core initiates a harmonization. It'll restore balance to the drift, repair the damage, and sever the architect's influence. But theirs. Obelisk's light faded. The song ended. He staggered back, heart pounding. Well, Jish asked, did the ancient monolith give you life advice, or just cryptic riddles about sandwiches again? Neither, Cal said slowly. It gave me a choice. Iller's expression turned grim. You've accessed the root layer. The archive is awakening. I'm not even fully awake, and it wants me to reboot the universe, Cal muttered. Perfect. They set up camp near the crater wall. 2 exposed to feel safe, 2 buried to attract sensors, while Jish patched the crawler with duct tape, alien glue, and increasingly wild insults. Cal sat beside Alara and stared at the stars. You said I'm a cipher, he said, but what does that mean? I don't feel like some sacred key. I feel like a guy who flunked flight training twice and once lost a whole paycheck to a vending machine. She looked at him, head tilted slightly. Ciphers aren't meant to be aware you are. A rare exception. Is that a compliment? It's a warning. Excellent, I'll put it next to my growing pile of ominous foreshadowing. She leaned back, eyes distant. The archive is more than knowledge, it's continuity, a recording of choices entire civilizations layered in memory. To touch it is to become part of that lattice, and the usurpers wanted to rewrite history, to overwrite it, to become the sole author of the drift. Cal stared at the sky for a long moment. You ever get the feeling we were all doing just fine, until fate looked down and said you? Yes, the tired one with questionable hygiene. You're up all the time, she said. Then they sat in silence. Far above the stars shimmered somewhere in the darkness. The archive stirred, and in the dust beside the obelisk, a second set of runes began to glow unseen. Waiting. Morning came with a sort of sullen silence that made Cal suspicious. No explosions, no sudden death squads, not even a passive-aggressive transmission from the usurpers, just whined dust and Jish frying what he claimed were high protein synth cakes that looked like someone had tried to bake ambition and regret into a patty. You'll eat it and thank me, Jish said, flipping one onto a dented plate. It sizzled ominously. Cal poked it with a fork. I've seen alien parasites with fewer moving parts. Adds texture, adds fear. Across from them, Alara meditated in stillness, her long ears twitching occasionally in response to subtle atmospheric changes, or possibly just Jish's cooking. She hadn't said much since the night before, though. Cal caught her once staring at the runes near the obelisk with a look he couldn't quite place, part worry, part familiarity, like she recognized a face in a dream but couldn't remember the name. When she finally rose, it was without preamble. The next relay is buried beneath the scorchful. Jish froze mid-bite. You sure? That place makes acid rain look like a spa treatment. It's shielded, she said. Old tech, Ellery built, still functioning, if barely doesn't scream safe to me. Cal muttered, nothing in this journey will be well, Jish said, rising and stuffing a synth cake in his mouth. As long as we've established a theme. They loaded up the crawler, now held together with so much patchwork Cal suspected it might qualify as a new species. The route to the scorchfold cut through a valley of crystallized basalt, the kind that reflected sensor signals and dreams in equal measure. Every so often Cal glimpsed movement out of the corner of his eye, shadows that didn't belong to anything they could see, slinking just out of reach. He kept one hand on the blaster and the other on the controls, occasionally slapping the dashboard when it beeped for no reason other than to test his nerves. I miss boring planets, he said after the third jump scare from a sentient tumbleweed. You're from Talmer 3, Jish pointed out. It rains glass spiders there. I miss glass spiders, Cal replied grimly. The scorchfold rose Like a wound in the earth stretching for kilometers in every direction, the ground shimmered with residual heat, and even. The clouds seemed to keep a respectful distance. They stopped at the edge, while Jish muttered a litany of complaints. Each more dramatic than the last. He finally concluded with, "This place smells like burned hair and lost." Dreams, Cal sniffed. He's not wrong. Alara activated a beacon from her pack A. Palm-sized sphere that floated into the air and projected a shimmering path across the fold. The relay is 30 clicks. In beneath a southern ridge, Jish peered into the haze. 30 clicks in a field that melts metal and common sense. Perfect. Let me just update my will to include died. Creatively, they crossed slowly, the crawler protected by an Alari shielding unit that wed with protest every time. The air temperature exceeded survivable levels. The hull rattled the console. Lights flickered, the radio played static interspersed with what sounded like elevator music from another dimension. Cal suspected the crawler itself was trying to dissociate. Halfway through, the heat shimmered and bent reality around. Them colors, distorted shapes, twisted. At one point, Cal swore he saw a flying fish made of mirrors glide past the window, wink at him, and vanish. "Okay," he said. "Someone needs to recalibrate physics." "That was a temporal echo," Iller said. "This place is where failed possibilities gather." "Failed possibilities?" Jish asked. "Like alternate timelines, like forgotten drafts of existence." Great Cal muttered. "A landfill for abandoned realities." Maybe one of them remembered deodorant. They made it to the southern ridge with a shielding unit one flicker away from complete emotional breakdown. The crawler limped to a stop beside a shattered tower, more bone than metal, half sunken into the sand. Alara led them inside the passage, illuminated by pulses of bioluminescent code running across the walls. "What is this place?" Cal asked. "A relay node, a memory chamber." A witness to what she looked at him. "Us." The core chamber lay beneath a vault door that opened at her touch. Inside, projections danced, flickers of old battles, glimpses of star maps, recordings of Alari and humans standing side by side, but they were incomplete, glitching like half-remembered dreams. Then Cal's presence triggered the main sequence. The room darkened, the projection stabilized. A figure appeared, tall, regal, Alari, but older, her ears adorned with woven metal threads, her eyes distant stars. "I am Verilyn, last keeper of the pact," she said. "If you see this, then the drift has stirred, and the archive stirs with it. The cipher has awakened." Cal blinked. "That's me, isn't it? I'm the stirring cipher. Your arrival confirms the breach." Verilyn continued. "The usurpers seek to claim the archive and sever our shared future. You cipher are the binding thread. Only you may reach the core." The projection fractured into starlight. "Anyone else feel like this? Is a lot of responsibility for someone who just learned how to fold socks correctly." Cal muttered. "The archive recognizes you." Alara said softly. "That is no accident. I always thought I'd go unnoticed." Background guy died Noli in Chapter 5. "Your Chapter 5, Jish confirmed, and you're still alive, so we're already off script." A low rumble cut through the floor, then another. Dust shook from the ceiling. "Please tell me that's tectonic enthusiasm and not company," Cal said. Jish scanned the sensor. 3 heat signatures. Not ours. The usurpers had found them. They bolted for the crawler. Cal glanced back once and saw the room fatting, the projections shutting down, the relay sealing itself. One last flicker pulsed. As they left, a single word whispered in the drift's voice: "Run." They didn't need convincing. Jish launched the crawler at speeds that suggested it was powered more by panic than fuel. Plasma blasts cratered the ground behind them as the pursuers gave chase. Sleek drones, shaped like silver knives, humming with the wrong kind of energy. "Don't they ever give up?" Cal shouted over the chaos. "Evil doesn't nap," Gry shouted back. "Believe me, I've checked." They swerved through the fold, Alara guiding them with steady calm, even as the walls around them burned. Cal's thoughts raced as fast as the crawler, visions of the archive, the choices ahead, the weight of what he carried. But somewhere beneath the panic, he also felt it, the drift. It pulsed him now, not a burden, but a rhythm, a beat waiting for a dance, and he knew with sudden certainty that the next step would take them off the map. The air inside the crawler was thick with the smell of burning wires, stale adrenaline, and what Jish insisted was emergency. "Always a but," Cal sighed, but Vale continued. "You're the cipher. Only your presence can awaken the core fully. It's keyed to your identity." So I'm the cosmic USB stick, more like the firewall, the key in that emergency. Escape clause, Ilara said softly, that explains nothing but somehow makes me. More anxious. Jish raised a hand. Unrelated question, why does that? Constellation, keep blinking like it's judging me. Vale glanced at it. It might be the archive's fragments are semi-sentient, they react to intent. Emotional resonance, unresolved guilt. Okay, Jish said, standing. I'm going to walk away and not examine my childhood trauma in front of space. Ghost. That night Cal couldn't sleep. The stars above flickered like they knew things he didn't. He sat on a crate outside the tent, fiddling with the drift-etched pendant around his neck. Ara joined him without a word, settling beside him with the quiet grace of someone who could probably kill a man with her pinky but preferred poetry. He didn't look at her. Do you think I was always meant for this, or did the archive just get bored? She considered that meaning isn't always placed by others, sometimes it's claimed. In the drift there are no chosen paths, only ones we choose to walk. That sounds wise. It's an Aluri fortune cookie proverb. He cracked a grin. Do Aluri have fortune cookies number? But we do have spiced ink rolls with affirmations. They stain your tongue and your future. They fell into a companionable silence until a sound broke it, something between a cough and a glitched trumpet. They turned to see Jish wrestling with a malfunctioning tent that had apparently gained sentience and decided to rebrand as a cape. It's absorbing me, Jish shouted. You're being hugged, I corrected. It's a violent hug. Cal stood. I got this. He marched over, and with the authority of someone who dealt with malfunctioning military beds before, smacked the tent's central node. It drooped, gave a sad whir, and collapsed. Jish emerged looking victorious, and betrayed. It tried to monologue before it died. It said, the stars are lies. That's just I for good night, Iller said. The next day they moved as a unit. Cal, Iller, Jish, and Vale's team. The terrain toward the next node was less terrain, and more floating debris field. Chunks of broken world drifted in looping orbits around a massive crystal tower suspended midair, tethered only by glowing strands of memory. Jish stared up. That's impossible technically, Vale said. It's just highly improbable, which is science fiction. For nobody packed enough rope. They had to jump between memory stabilized platforms using burst boots and Alara's alarming ability to calculate trajectories on the fly. Jish screamed during every leap, mostly on principle. Cal found it oddly freeing. Like dancing between forgotten thoughts. As they neared the tower, time itself began to warp. Cal saw echoes of himself. Others alternate paths, trailing like shadows. One version of him was laughing. Another looked terrified. A third held Alara's hand tightly. I don't like being haunted by myself, he muttered. You'll get used to it, Vale said, landing beside him. Inside the tower the air was thick with possibilities. The note glowed in the center, a sphere of impossible shape. Shifting as you looked at it. Cal approached, heart pounding. It didn't react. He said, hello, Cypher here. Holder of anxiety and unresolved dreams. Still nothing. Yara stepped beside him. It needs a truth, a story only. You can offer. He hesitated, then spoke quietly. I'm scared, not of dying, of mattering. I've spent so long trying not to be important, and now I'm being told I'm the last thread holding back the rewrite of existence, and I don't feel ready. I might never be ready, but I'll go anyway, not because I'm chosen, but because someone has to. The sphere pulsed once gently, then opened like a blooming star. The fifth node was his. Behind them something howled, not animal, not machine. The architect was listening. The sky above the hollow step bent in impossible directions, like someone had shaken the cosmos and forgotten to iron it. Afterward stars bled sideways. Time hiccuped every few seconds, repeating blinks and half-breathed words. Jish declared it the most unpleasant illusion since my cousin tried to turn his own eyeballs inside out for a science fair. No one asked about the cousin. They had reached the final node. The core of the archive pulsed beneath the soil, not in a chamber, not in a vault, but everywhere, woven through the steppe like roots of a sleeping world. It was alive, aware, and waiting. The architect's arrival would overwrite it. They had hours at most. Captain Vale stood at the edge of the field, her armor gleaming with embedded shard light. We activate the core from 5 convergence points, 1 person at each. Cal, you'll go to the heart. Everyone else keep the harmonic steady. If one link falters, the core closes. Cal flexed his fingers. So I just walk into the center of a semi-conscious Data God and politely ask it to save reality basically cool do I bow first, or just offer cookies Vale almost smiled if you see a menu you've gone too deep, the field was not terrain it was a dream of terrain every step Cal took shifted the color sounds even gravity his boots left no mark, but memories bloom beneath. Him faint holograms of other times other lives he saw himself in battle. Laughter and love and failure none of it was fixed the drift was reminding him. You are more than one path you are all your choices. He reached the center where the archive's core hung above a platform shaped like a spiral drawn by a child with too much imagination and a malfunctioning ruler it thrummed with light that tasted like nostalgia. I don't suppose you can make this easy, Cal said aloud. The core responded with a burst of symbols some he recognized from his pendant others felt like they had always lived in the back of his brain, waiting for permission. He stepped into the light it enveloped him not like drowning, but like remembering something he hadn't realized he'd forgotten his body blurred at the edges, his mind stretched the voices came first I was afraid I ran I chose silence I heard someone then a final whisper gentle and unshaken but I kept going, and with that the core opened from the ridge Alara watched as a sphere of golden white unfolded above the step tendrils of drift light spiraling outward in slow graceful arcs. The convergence had begun. Jish at his node had somehow reprogrammed his wrist scanner to emit harmonic bursts through what he called an aggressively repurposed lunchbox. He tapped it like a seasoned DJ holding the frequency, though if this thing starts singing old war jingles again, I'm blamming. Entropy Veil poised and steady stood motionless, her own shard glowing like a second heart. 3 more minutes, no interference so far. Wait, I spoke too soon. Incoming. The sky tore, it didn't break with sound, it unzipped in a way that logic protested through the breach. The architect descended not as a figure, but as a presence, geometry that rejected comprehension, a shape that kept trying to make itself known but failed because the drift fought it at every angle. Cal felt it approach. His body trembled not from fear, but from recognition. This was the thing that had stalked behind every shadow in his journey, not a villain, a concept, a being that believed only one story should survive. It spoke, though it had no mouth. You are not real, you are divergence, you are flaw. Cal exhaled, and you are late. He raised his arms, and the drift responded. The memories around him lit up like constellations, thousands of them. His failures, his joys, his doubts, and woven through them all choice, not perfection. Not destiny, just decisions. That was the archive's truth. It wasn't about control. It was about connection. The architect screamed a sound like breaking symphonies. The convergence pulsed across the field. The harmonics held Alara, her hand pressed to the ground, channeled her own shard. Her ears twitched slightly, always the first sign she was focusing. The archive is accepting him, the core is opening fully. He's doing it. Jish wiped a tear. I always knew he was special, mostly because nobody else talks to malfunctioning doors and survives. The architect surged forward one last time, lashing out with force that bent the platform around Cal, but it could not unmake him. Not anymore. I'm not a flaw, he said. I'm a variable, and variables rewrite equations. The core responded. Light exploded outward, not destructive, but rewriting. The sky healed the torn edges of reality, folded back into place. The architect recoiled, its shape unraveling as possibility rejected singularity. It didn't die, it dispersed, unwritten from the narrative. The hollow step shimmered, then fell still. Cal stood alone in the heart of the archive. The light around him dimmed, the connection faded. When he walked out of the field, the others were waiting. Vale saluted him. Jish offered a protein bar. Iller just smiled, her eyes unreadable. It's done, Cal asked. Done, Vale said. The core is anchored, the drift is stabilizing, and the architect gone. Iller answered, its echo may linger, but its will is broken. Cal let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd held for days. So what now? Jish raised his hand. We go somewhere nice with food that doesn't try to hug me, and no paradoxes. Just once I'd like to eat lunch without an existential crisis. I'd like that too, Cal said. They loaded into the crawler. It groaned a little but didn't explode, which felt like progress. As they pulled away from the hollow step, the platform behind them dissolved into wind. You changed, Alara said quietly, watching him from the passenger seat. Yeah, Cal admitted. I think I finally figured out how to stop running. From what? From Being part of something bigger, Jish snorted from the back, took long enough. Now let's find a planet with beaches, preferably one where the sun doesn't blink or turn into a snake, Cal added. That too, as they drove into the distance, stars began to realign slowly. Gently the drift mended itself, and far beneath the archive watched not with judgment with memory, it remembered the man who walked into its heart uncertain. And walked out whole. The universe had been rewritten not by power but by